The morning was cold and quiet on the Texas plains. The air carried a faint smell of rain, and mist floated above the grass like thin smoke. Jacob Brooks, a rancher who lived miles away from town, drove his old pickup truck down the dirt road that led to his pasture. He liked mornings like this, silent, steady, predictable. The world felt calm. He was heading to check the fence near the south field when something unusual caught his eye. A small figure stood by the wooden gate at the edge of his land. From a distance, it looked like a child, too small and too still to be anyone else. Jacob slowed the truck, his heart tightening with unease. Children didn't wander this far out. Not alone. When he stopped, the boy didn't move. He just stood there in a torn jacket 2 sizes too big, shoes without laces, and jeans stained with dust. His dark hair was messy, his cheeks red from the cold. He looked about 8 or 9, though it was hard to tell with how thin he was. Jacob stepped out of the truck and walked closer. "Hey there, son," he said in a calm voice. "You lost?" The boy lifted his head slowly. His eyes were wide but dull, as if they had seen too much already. He swallowed before speaking. His voice was small, shaking like dry leaves. "Sir, can you bury my sister?" Jacob froze. The words hit him like a heavy stone. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at the boy, searching his face for any sign that he had misunderstood. But the boy's eyes told him everything. "Where's your sister, son?" Jacob asked softly. The boy turned and pointed toward the woods beyond the pasture, a thin line of trees about a 1/4 mile away. Jacob's chest tightened. He nodded and said, "All right, let's go see." The boy walked ahead, his steps slow and careful. Jacob followed, boots crunching over dry leaves. The silence between them was heavy. Only the wind moved through the trees, making the branches whisper. After a few minutes, they reached a small clearing where an old blanket lay on the ground. Something small rested beneath it. The boy stopped and looked down at it without speaking. Jacob stepped forward slowly, his stomach twisting. He knelt beside the blanket and lifted one corner. Beneath it was the body of a young girl. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted. She looked peaceful, as if she were only asleep. She might have been 10 at most. Jacob let the blanket fall back into place and sat there for a long moment, his hand on his hat. "What happened?" he asked quietly. The boy stood with his arms crossed tightly against his chest. His voice cracked when he answered. "She got sick 2 days ago. I tried to find help, but no one came. I kept her warm. I gave her the last of the bread, but then she got quiet." His chin trembled. "She stopped breathing last night." Jacob's throat ached. He had no words big enough for something like that. He took a deep breath and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the best you could, son," he said. "What's your name?" "Tommy," the boy whispered. "She's Lily," Jacob nodded. "All right, Tommy. We'll take care of Lily." He stood up, his joints stiff from the cold and from something heavier inside him. He looked around the clearing, the thin trees, the lonely silence. A child should never have to stand here like this. Jacob walked back to his truck and returned with an old quilt. He knelt and wrapped the girl's body gently, making sure her small hands were covered. Then he lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light. Tommy followed close behind, silent except for the sound of his uneven breathing. At the ranch, the wide land stretched under a soft gray sky. Horses grazed near the fence and the windmill creaked in the distance. Jacob carried Lily to a quiet place on a small hill behind the barn. Wildflowers grew there in the spring, and the sun always set right over it. He set her down carefully, then fetched a shovel from the shed. Tommy stood nearby, clutching the edge of his jacket. His lips moved now and then, whispering something Jacob couldn't hear. Maybe he was talking to Lily. Jacob started digging. The ground was firm but not frozen. Each scoop of soil came with a sharp ache in his chest. He had buried animals, neighbors, even his own parents, but never a child. The sound of metal hitting earth echoed in the quiet air. Tommy tried to help. He picked up a smaller spade from the shed and began to dig beside Jacob, though his small arms could barely move the dirt. Jacob wanted to tell him to rest, but he didn't. He understood that the boy needed to do something. By the time the sun started lowering, the grave was ready. Jacob set Lily down gently, covering her with the quilt. He took off his hat and bowed his head. Tommy did the same, his small fingers gripping the edge of the hole. After a moment, Tommy whispered, "I'm sorry, Lily, I couldn't make you better." Jacob looked away quickly, blinking hard. He reached down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "She's safe now, son. She's not hurting anymore." They filled the grave together, slow and quiet. When it was done, Jacob found an old wooden plank and carved Lily into it with his pocket knife. He placed it at the head of the grave. The wind blew gently across the hill, carrying the faint smell of rain again. Tommy stood there for a long time, staring at the mound of soil. Jacob waited beside him until the boy finally whispered, "Thank you, sir." Jacob nodded. "You don't have to thank me. No one should face this alone." He led Tommy back to the house. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace reached the edges of the small living room. The old clock on the wall ticked slowly. Jacob poured some water and handed it to the boy, who drank it quickly. "You hungry?" Jacob asked. Tommy hesitated, then nodded. Jacob warmed a bowl of soup on the stove. The smell filled the room, simple and homely. When Jacob placed it on the table, the boy ate fast, as if afraid someone might take it away. Jacob watched quietly, his chest tightening again. When the bowl was empty, Tommy sat back, tired but calmer. Jacob asked gently, "Where were you before you came here?" The boy rubbed his eyes. "Me and Lily lived with our mom and dad by the river. They worked at a small sawmill. But one day the mill closed. Then Mama got sick. We tried to help her, but she didn't get better. She told me to take care of Lily." He paused, eyes glistening. "Then Papa went to find work and never came back." Jacob listened without interrupting. He could tell the story wasn't rehearsed. It came out in pieces, heavy and honest. "So you've been on your own since then?" Tommy nodded. "We walked a lot. Some people gave us food, but we didn't stay anywhere long. Then Lily started coughing. I thought maybe the town doctor could help, but we didn't make it." The room was silent again, except for the faint crackle of the fire. Jacob felt something shift inside him, a mix of sorrow and anger at the world for being so careless with children like this. "You did everything you could, Tommy," Jacob said quietly. "You kept her safe as long as you could." The boy looked down. "I didn't keep her safe enough." Jacob shook his head. "Sometimes it's not about what we can do. It's about what we don't give up doing." He stood and fetched an old blanket. "There's a small room down the hall. You can sleep there tonight. It's warm." Tommy hesitated. "You don't have to let me stay." Jacob looked at him firmly. "I know I don't, but I want to." Tommy gave a small nod. He followed Jacob down the hall. The room was simple, a narrow bed, a window with faded curtains, a wooden chest at the end. But to Tommy, it looked like a palace compared to the cold ground he had known for days. Jacob left him there with the blanket. "If you need anything, I'll be in the next room," he said. Tommy crawled into bed and pulled the blanket close. The warmth wrapped around him like something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. He stared at the ceiling for a while, whispering something softly. Jacob paused at the doorway and realized the boy was praying. "Good night, Lily," the boy whispered. "I found a nice man. He helped you. Maybe he'll help me too." Jacob stood there in the dim light, unable to move. His chest tightened in a way that surprised him. It had been years since anyone had spoken in this house except him. He had lost his wife to illness long ago, and since then the ranch had been quiet, almost lifeless. That night, as the wind blew outside and the moonlight spilled through the window, Jacob sat by the fireplace thinking about the boy. The ranch had been lonely for too long. Maybe this child needed a place, and maybe, in some strange way, he needed the child just as much. He looked toward the hallway and whispered, "Maybe tomorrow we'll start something new." The next morning, the sun rose gently over the fields. Jacob woke early, as always, and poured coffee. When he turned, he saw Tommy already awake, sitting at the table. The boy looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he was still welcome. Jacob smiled faintly. "Morning, partner. You like milk?" Tommy nodded. Jacob poured him a glass. The boy sipped it slowly, his small hands still trembling slightly. Outside, the horses whinnied. The ranch was coming to life again. Jacob studied the boy quietly. He had seen many things in his life, storms, droughts, loss, but never courage like this. A child who had walked alone to find help for his sister, who had buried pain no one his age should ever know. Jacob knew then that something had changed. This wasn't just another morning on the ranch. It was the beginning of something new, something that would test and heal them both. As the boy finished his milk, Jacob said softly, "Come on, Tommy. Let's go feed the horses. They'll be expecting us." The boy looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. For the first time in years, Jacob heard laughter, small, shy, but real, echoing through his home. And outside, under the wide Texas sky, two souls who had lost Eve. The next morning, the air was soft and clear. The sun rose over the ranch hills, painting everything gold. The smell of hay and coffee mixed in the air. Jacob had already been up for an hour, feeding the horses and checking the fences. When he walked back to the house, he saw the small figure of Tommy standing near the porch, barefoot and holding his sister's ribbon in his hand. Jacob smiled slightly. "You're up early, kid," Tommy nodded. "Couldn't sleep much. The rooster was loud," Jacob chuckled. "That's his job. Come on, let's get you some breakfast." Inside the kitchen, the table was set with warm biscuits, milk, and fried eggs. Tommy looked at it like he couldn't believe it was all for him. He sat down slowly, glancing at Jacob before taking a bite. "You eat like you haven't seen food in a week," Jacob said softly. Tommy smiled a little, his mouth full. "It's been a while since I had warm food, sir." Jacob didn't correct him for calling him sir. It sounded respectful, innocent. He just nodded. "Well, there's plenty here. You'll eat 3 times a day while you're under my roof. That's a rule." Tommy looked up, eyes bright. "So, I can stay?" Jacob paused, pretending to think. "We'll see how good you are at ranch work first," he said with a grin. The boy laughed quietly, and that sound filled the room like sunlight. After breakfast, Jacob gave him an old pair of boots and a hat that had belonged to his nephew years ago. They were a little big, but Tommy didn't care. He followed Jacob outside, eager to help. The ranch stretched far and wide. Fences, barns, horses, cattle, and acres of open land. The wind moved through the grass like waves. Jacob showed Tommy how to fill the water troughs, feed the chickens, and brush the horses. The boy watched carefully, listening to every word. "Always talk to them," Jacob said while brushing a horse's neck. "Animals feel safe when they hear your voice." Tommy nodded seriously and started talking to the horse in a low, gentle tone. Jacob smiled quietly. There was something natural about the boy's kindness. Days turned into weeks. Each morning began with the same rhythm: breakfast, chores, lunch, and then more work till sunset. Tommy learned fast. He helped fix the barn door, carried buckets of water, and even learned how to ride a horse, though he was still a little scared at first. Jacob never forced him. He just stood nearby, steady and calm, letting the boy take his time. Eventually, Tommy climbed onto the horse's back, gripping the reins tight. The horse moved slowly around the corral, and Jacob walked beside him. "You're doing fine," Jacob said. "Don't pull too hard. Let him feel your hand." Tommy smiled nervously. "He's listening to me." "That's right," Jacob said with pride. "He knows you mean no harm." That evening after dinner, Tommy sat by the fireplace with Jacob. The boy held the small wooden cross Jacob had carved for Lily's grave and traced the letters with his finger. "Do you think she's happy now?" Tommy asked. Jacob looked into the fire for a long time before answering. "I think she's resting, son. And I think she's proud of you." Tommy nodded slowly. "I hope she is. She always said I could take care of people one day." Jacob's throat tightened. "You're already doing that," he said softly. Word of the little boy spread through the small town nearby. Folks came to the ranch, bringing old clothes, shoes, and even toys. Mrs. Green from the bakery dropped by every weekend with bread and cookies. The sheriff visited too, asking questions about what had happened. Jacob told him everything, careful and honest. When the sheriff asked, "What do you plan to do with the boy?" Jacob didn't hesitate. "He's staying with me," he said, "at least until I can make it legal." The sheriff nodded, surprised but not disagreeing. "You'd make a good father, Jacob." Jacob shrugged, though deep down the words warmed him. "I'll do what's right." For Tommy, life began to change in quiet ways. He smiled more. He slept through the night. He talked about the stars, about how his sister once told him that good people become light in the sky when they leave. Every evening he would stand by her grave on the hill and whisper, "Good night, Lily. The ranch is big, but I'm not scared anymore." Jacob often watched from a distance, never interrupting. Those small moments made him realize that the boy had brought something back into his life: hope, laughter, and a reason to wake up every morning beyond routine. Winter rolled in again, gentle but cold. The wind carried snowflakes across the empty fields. Jacob taught Tommy how to chop firewood and gather hay for the horses. They worked side by side, their breath turning white in the air. One afternoon, Tommy was helping near the barn when he tripped and scraped his knee. The boy winced but tried not to cry. Jacob walked over, picked him up, and cleaned the small wound with warm water. "It's okay to cry, you know," Jacob said. Tommy shook his head. "Lily used to say crying doesn't help." Jacob smiled softly. "Sometimes it does. It lets the hurt out so you can heal faster." Tommy thought about it and whispered, "Did you ever cry, sir?" Jacob looked at the fire crackling in the stove. "A long time ago," he said. "When I lost someone too." The boy didn't ask who. He just nodded and said, "Then you understand." Jacob looked at him, realizing how much strength this little child carried in such a small body. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Jacob sat on the porch looking at the stars. He thought about his late wife, about the quiet years that had followed her death, about how empty the ranch had felt. Now there was laughter, noise, movement, signs of life again. He whispered into the dark, "You'd like him, Mary, he's brave." A few weeks later, a social worker came from the county office to check on Tommy. She asked many questions and looked around the house. Jacob answered patiently. When she was done, she said, "It's not common for a man living alone to take in a child that's not his kin." "You sure about this?" Jacob's voice was firm but gentle. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. That boy's been through enough. He deserves a home." She nodded slowly. "We'll start the adoption process then. It'll take some time." Tommy waited outside the whole time, nervous. When the woman finally left, he looked up at Jacob. "She's not taking me away, right?" Jacob smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. "Not if I can help it, son. You belong here." For the first time, Tommy smiled wide and hugged him tightly. Jacob froze for a second, then gently placed his arm around the boy's back. From that day on, they were more than just a rancher and a boy. They were something closer to father and son. Spring came early that year. The land turned green again and the wildflowers bloomed on the hill where Lily rested. Tommy would place a new flower there every morning. Jacob built a small white fence around the grave and added a bench beside it. They sat there together sometimes, watching the sunset. One evening, Tommy said, "I think Lily likes it here. The wind sounds happy." Jacob smiled. "I think she does too. She's got the best view in Texas." Tommy laughed softly. "Maybe she's talking to the horses." "Maybe," Jacob said. "Or maybe she's watching over you." The boy leaned against Jacob's arm, quiet and content. As months passed, Tommy became stronger. He could ride his horse alone now, guide the cattle, and even repair fences. He loved the work, loved the land, and loved Jacob like a father. He still missed his sister deeply, but the sadness wasn't sharp anymore. It had turned into gentle memory. One summer afternoon, they went into town to get supplies. People greeted them warmly. Some still whispered when they saw the pair, the old rancher and the boy he took in, but most smiled with kindness. At the general store, Mrs. Green gave Tommy a jar of jam. "For helping your pa," she said. Tommy grinned proudly, not correcting her. On the drive back, he looked at Jacob and said, "People think you're my dad." Jacob kept his eyes on the road. "And how does that make you feel?" Tommy smiled. "Like it's true." Jacob's eyes softened. "Maybe it is." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange and pink. The boy leaned back against the wooden rail and sighed. "I like it here. I don't ever want to leave." Jacob nodded slowly. "Then you won't. This is your home now, Tommy, as long as you want it." The adoption papers were approved that fall. The sheriff brought the official documents to the ranch. Jacob signed his name with steady hands while Tommy stood beside him, eyes wide with excitement. When the sheriff handed Jacob the final paper, he smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks, it's official. You've got yourself a son." Jacob looked down at the boy and said quietly, "Welcome home, Tommy Brooks." Tommy hugged him again, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Dad." Jacob's heart swelled. It had been years since anyone had called him that word. He hugged the boy tighter, feeling the weight of everything that had brought them here. Loss, kindness, and the strange ways life can heal itself. From that day on, things were different but peaceful. Tommy went to the small school in town. Jacob helped him with homework at night, though he often pretended to be grumpy about it. They built a birdhouse together, planted a small garden, and fixed the old swing by the oak tree. Every Sunday, they visited Lily's grave together. Tommy would tell her stories about school, the horses, and the ranch life. Jacob would stand behind him, silent, his hat pressed to his chest. Years passed slowly but kindly. The ranch stayed busy, but laughter never left it again. Tommy grew taller, stronger, more confident. He never forgot the day he arrived there, the day he asked a stranger for help to bury his sister and instead found a father. One evening many years later, when the sun dipped behind the hills, Tommy stood by the fence watching the sky.